Okay, so this is a vlog where I'll talk about the prop making building process from beginning to end, which I'm walking. I'm behind. I'm about 30 feet behind these dog walkers, and they keep stopping, so I have to keep holding back. So I'm basically following them, keeping my distance, talking into a phone. I think they're fairly suspicious of me, but that's what you get when you walk your dogs at this hour, so tough. Yeah, it's awkward. They've come to a full stop now, and now I'm going to have to just stroll slowly. Anyway, so I included, I've got my problem-solving section in front of me, which I added to the entire business, the entire building process throughout that, just because, I mean, I know the building was technically part of production, but I thought not only would it be good to separate those pieces of work out, because it can get confusing the way they're actually intertwined. I thought that problem solving was a more apt description of the building process, because it is, and always is, whenever I'm building something, very much hit and miss. Oh crap, I've got someone walking their dog behind me as well. I'm in a pincer motion. I'm going to stop recording. Okay, they were stopping to put their dogs on leashes to let me pass. They're actually very nice. Don't know what I said actually. They're very nice. Anyway, so I've lost them. So I chose to include it in problem solving because it's very much a hit and miss process, and I figured problem solving doesn't happen preemptively like the intended use of problem solving in the project, in the way it's dictated in the brief. And I suppose in a way it's always been the way I do things, because I like to plunge headfirst into stuff. I like working with my hands, and I hate planning, so I'm usually diving into stuff, and that's when the best stuff comes out, really. The best stuff doesn't necessarily come from 40 drawings, because you don't know what works until you wrap your hands around it. And I touched upon it in the problem solving, which I will open up and look at and reference, but talking to Sean Hedges-Quinn, he said it's all about practical stuff. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you wrap your hands around stuff, you do it, you learn it from real hands-on experience, and that's how you build up being able to do something properly. It's like, I've probably said this before, I feel like I'm quoting myself again. It's like there was a bit in like series of unfortunate events where like you can read a million books on how to sail, but it's different to being out on a boat and being able to do it. So I figured I'd tackle the problem solving as I went through. But anyway, this isn't a vlog for problem solving. This is a vlog for the building process. So I started building a long time ago, as soon as I had just a basic idea for what the film wanted to be, a stop motion with a puppet of my granddad. So I did a small sculpt of his head. This would have been, blimey, way before my uni interviews, because I remember I cast it by then and made a mould of it and gave it to my big sister when I was staying with her down in London for an open day. But the clay that I used, again, which is another reason to throw yourself into it, I bought myself a clay. It was awful to use. It was the kind of clay that would form. It wasn't additive, or you couldn't really carve away at it. It was more like plasticine. It was more awkward than plasticine. I'd have been thrilled with plasticine after that, but I managed it. And again, I could have read 10 books on sculpting, but I learned by doing. It took me way longer than it should have to sculpt that tiny head, but I got it done I'm looking at a photo of the original sculpt now, and it looks pretty damn good. considering how tiny it was. Haven't done a lot of sculpting before. Certainly wouldn't say I had a knack for it. I would just say you put the hours in and you spend a long time trying to make it look like a photo, and you're bound to get there. Just the ideal way to learn. I did consult some resources later on into building, which I'm not sure if I have documented yet. A series of videos about sculpting heads, and a big thing I took from that also was looking at the tools they used and finding similar looking things from around my house. I used a lot of a spot popping kit that my mum has, because she's kind of a weirdo. Just little tools to get spots on your back, and they come in all different shapes, like a torture kit. And they worked really well for sculpting, carving out different shapes and flattening and smoothing stuff. And then the next thing then I built the stop motion body after doing a lot of experimentations with armatures. So because at this point I was still thinking stop motion is easy. I sit in my house for like 4 days, move at a frame at a time, pretty laid back. And then the more I did research into stop motion, I thought, okay, well, these people who do stop motion are serious. I've seen videos of people getting massive bits of cardboard and going out into the car parks where they work to act out the scenes themselves and assume different characterizations. And I was thinking, you just move their leg a little bit at a time. And stop being a stop motion animator is like being another actor. But the difference is, if you mess up the performance, it's taken you 5 hours to get 20 seconds of footage, or I don't know what the actual ratio is. It's probably stupider than that. And you don't get another go at it instantly. But anyway, before all this, I was making a stop motion figure. I experimented with armatures because that's simply the best, most professional way to make stop motion figures. I've made stop motion figures before with wire armatures. Nothing to the same level. I think they were more or less only wire armatures with like tape and stuff around them. This was when I was about 11, so this is ages ago, to me at least. So the wire armature. So I bought some ball bearings because I figured ball and socket joints. I looked into it, and I have a rotary tool, I have a decent set of saws, and I have access to sheet metal in all of the fly tipping areas around me, So an old washing machine in a ditch a few days before, and I thought, perfect. So the plan would be, with a ball and socket joint, to cut that into a longer rectangle, drill 2 holes for the balls to fall into. The balls they'd be like a ball bearing with a wire coming out of it, and then they'd be able to turn, and you'd be able to adjust the tension with small nut and bolt set. And you get them to such a tension that the characters will move freely, such that you don't interfere with the whole body by bending the arm a little bit, but also hold firm. The test that I ended up doing, I got some ball bearings, and my pop offered to help me weld stuff up at his house, but then because he's got all welding equipment, and that was what a lot of it was hinging off of. But then he fell ill, unfortunately. He's doing okay now. Anyway, so I didn't go up to his house to weld, so I just figured I will super glue to these smooth metal ball bearings. That'll work a fucking treat. Excuse me. But no, it didn't. You can't super glue anything to ball bearings. So I ended up using a round-headed bolt to do the test with, and that turned relatively well. And I decided, okay, the Frankenstein's principle. You make everything bigger to start off with, and it's easier to deal with later. So I made it out of wood for a start, because that would just be easier and quicker to machine. And it worked okay, it turned and everything. But I figured, it's such precise work, and I don't really know whether I'll be able to make that many ball and socket armatures. I got templates and printed loads of stuff off, and yeah, it just didn't come off. I decided a wire armature is the way to go. I saw more and more stop motions that were perfectly successful using just wire armatures. But no, the ball and socket armatures are incredible things. I mean, the Willis O'Brien armatures that from King Kong. I mean, I was watching a video. Peter Jackson owns the King Kong armature, and it still works perfectly. However long ago that was, it's mad. Stop motion's come leaps and bounds since then, but they still haven't. They're still not making armatures any better. The precise, tiny work. I mean, his hands are like tiny, precise machined things. It's works of art, really. It's whoops. Anyway, but I couldn't dream of coming anything close to that on a first try. So I'm glad I went for the wire armature. So the wire armature, they recommend using 2-part epoxy clay, which is pricey. So I opted for 2-part epoxy glue, which is cheap as. You can get it in the quid shops. You can get a few tubes online for a couple of quid. It's great stuff. It's good. It's usually an emergency, though, when I'm using 2-part epoxy. It's like, this just isn't going to happen. It's not sticking together. I used it on the tables at points where there was a lot of tension on the veneer, and I literally had to, the super glue wasn't holding it. So I literally had to hold it in place. 5 minutes setting 2-part epoxy, and suddenly you've got a hardened plastic. So I used 2-part epoxy and leather on the original armature, the wire armature. I figured leather's nice, and I have a lot of leather. I bought a bag of like Italian shoe offcuts when I was about 13, and I'm still working through them. Leather's nice and pliable and sturdy, and it would soak up the epoxy glue, but at the same time, and it'd form into a solid shape. It's just a nice thick fabric. Obviously it doesn't need to look pretty because it's getting covered up, and what's covering it up is also getting covered up. So I used the leather, relatively successful wire armature. I thought I did well. Building up the body, the techniques I used then weren't the best. It was far heavier and denser than it needed to be. The way that I built the final body, if I'd have applied those same techniques then, and considering they're much, much simpler, less ambitious techniques that work 10 times as well, I'm surprised it didn't occur to me. It just seemed too easy. But I'll get to that later, obviously, in this never-ending tale. I used cotton balls, wet wipes, because wet wipes are just sheets of fabric. I saw people using cotton webbing in big rolls, and I didn't have that, but I had hemming web and wet wipes in the house, and I figured, what is the difference? I'll seal them down with latex, but obviously you use cotton balls, and as tight as you pack the wet wipes, it's going to come out a bit bumpy. But none of that would have showed under the clothes. I eyeballed it too much, and at that point, stupid me, I didn't even have a reference for my granddad's body type. Not just my granddad's body type, just a realistic male body type. I was just guessing. And I made him a lot chunkier than he needed to be. He was a bit out of proportion. The shoulders were about right, all of the proportions were about right from the original wire armature. But when I added the cotton and bulked him out, I went overboard. But since, I took photos of my granddad front on and side on, which wasn't loads of fun. Not for me, it was just awkward. But anyway, so the wire armature was cotton, and still, it bent well, it posed well. At that point, I didn't have a method for rooting it to the ground, but I figured that shouldn't be too hard, and I was probably right to think that, it's just a base and a solid skewer or, rod going up into his bum. Yeah, no, sorry, still recording. It went off. So, yes, it is recording. Okay, apologies. So, that was good. That stop motion figure was good. Okay. Then the next problem arose. I lined the head up to it, and silly me, the head that I had almost forgotten about as I was making the stop motion figure is about half as big as it needs to be in proportion to the body. And I was thinking, well, maybe if I shoot it from above. No, it was stupidly out of proportion. Yeah, it was never going to work. I'm worried if this is recording when I'm going away. I'm just going to quickly check. When I switch to this app, is it still going? Okay, it's on 16 minutes now. 16 minutes. Go onto the app. I'll wait about 10 seconds. I'll do my best to edit all this out. Okay, it was on 16 seconds. What's it on now? 16:10. I'm going to leave it for longer. It was on 16:14. Okay, it's on 16:24. Okay, sorry, okay. It is still recording when I've gone away, so I was just getting paranoid there. So, the wire armature, it was good. The head was out of proportion, so the next step was sculpt a new head. And I thought, great, another chance to sculpt. At this point, I'd seen some more stop motion films, and I wasn't 100% on the style of the head that I wanted to be. But before I got to the point of sculpting the new head, I watched the Unknown Mortal Orchestra music video with the rod puppets, and I figured this is the way to go with it. So first thing I did was I thought, Christ, another new body. Snapped his arms, snapped the armatures, and attached rods to those, and it did move quite well. But at the same time, it was built for stop motion, and it was far too bulky for rod puppetry. It was probably too bulky for stop motion, but rod puppetry, it was a definite no. It was just a very heavy, dense thing. But I didn't come to that realization at that moment. I decided to keep going with that body and sculpted the new head with that in mind. So I sculpted the new head. No, tell you what, I think I sculpted the new head a bit later. I did. I sculpted it after I watched Man O' Man and saw that marionette-style rod puppets don't benefit from all the wrinkles I was sculpting him with. Because originally the stop-motion puppet was planned to have a opposable face, and I learned a lot of that from Stop Mo Nick on YouTube, where he'd make a base head out of wood and then a wire jaw and eyebrows, so that when you fitted the latex into it, he'd be able to change his expression frame by frame. Interestingly enough, when I did tests with that, he made it out of I don't know. I think it was either foam latex, but I think the one I was watching was a silicone head. And what went wrong was when latex mixes or touches certain metals, it turns gold and goes all hard. Really bizarre. I think it's happened to me on certain coins touching latex, and it happened when I used the thin jewellery wire on the latex. So the head that I did sculpt that was posable, the latex all turned brittle and discoloured. Never totally found out why. I couldn't find loads on it, but anyway, I discarded that because and also, yeah, the point is, rod puppet marionettes, they could benefit from having different interchangeable heads, but I figured, is my sculpting really at that point? I could probably do a decent one-off sculpture. Could I do 3 sculptures exactly the same, except he has a slightly different expression? I don't know, and I don't know diegetically whether he'll need that many expressions walking around his own workshop. And I'd also noticed that a lot of the heads from different angles seem to change expressions. So I figured I could try and incorporate some of that into the sculpture. So yes, I sculpted a new head without wrinkles, but like the Man O Man, they had a lot of facial features which signified age the characters, like having deep set features and bags around the eyes without wrinkles. The original head sculpt was very wrinkly, wrinklier than my granddad is, even, because I figured, these are good to make me look like a good detailed sculptor and probably cover up the imperfections in the basic shape of his face versus the actual man. But it seemed that all of my work beforehand had gone very slowly leading up to the final major, because I figured all this design stuff is going to take a big hand in it, and I can only go so far. My granddad is always going to look like my granddad, so that is my only safe bet. Then by the time I got up to the final major, all of my progress was lost, and it was more or less start from scratch. It's probably nah, it didn't. I was going to say it probably set me back having done all that stuff, but at the same time, it is trial and error, and I did definitely learn from it. And I'd fallen into pitfalls that I didn't have to during the final major. Not that I didn't fall into many new ones throughout. So next it was the next sculpt, which I was quite pleased with. I sculpted it with a wax paste, which was really nice to use. Never sets though. The wax paste doesn't set; it just stays flexible forever. When you heat it up, it melts and becomes softer. When you cool it, it becomes relatively hard, but still wouldn't be hard enough to use any of the sculptures. It's good for casting, supposedly. So, and what I recommended on the packet was smooth it out with some turpentine, which, I've just got a bottle of white spirit on my house, and I used it to smooth out the face as I was sculpting. Great, because I also use this white spirit to thin out silicone. If I want the cheap bathroom silicone I use to be able to pour smoothly into a mold, I didn't make the connection. So I took that sculpt, I cast it 2-part in silicone, left it an awfully long time to set, and when I took the two halves away, the white spirit itself had totally eroded the sculpture. I've got a pretty sad photo of it. This was a pretty low point for me. I was feeling like I'm not far enough at this point, and I've had this setback, and I'm going to need to sculpt a new head. I'm going to need to start from scratch, and we're going to need to figure out another method because this isn't working. Because the white spirit had interfered with the sculpture itself. While I was sculpting the new head, I figured, okay, plain silicone mould will probably work. And I didn't sculpt the ears. I decided to put the ears on after, because the ears are usually where the seam forms in a 2-part mould, which they come out very ugly where the seam forms over the ears. They're fairly precise, detailed things, and the seam forming along the head is okay. And then I put ears at the top. So I sculpted some little ears out of this modelling wax paste, and just used a plain silicone mould. But it still had the same effect. Silicone's a strong, kind of volatile, corrosive-y substance that hurts on your skin. This bathroom stuff, and it still kind of eroded. It was more successful than the other one, but it still kind of eroded and softened the sculpture up to the point that it jeopardised the casting. So I figured, okay, well, this wax paste. The first time I did a plaster cast, the first time I was going to, I decided, oh crap, I can't do a plaster cast because I've already let my original sculpture dry. I left it to set, wasn't keeping it moist, and I wasn't using the right kind of clay that would stay moist anyway, and I didn't cast it straight away. And the point of a plaster cast is you make a clay casting with natural clay, cast it in plaster immediately, 2-part. Again, a technique I saw on Stop Mo Nick's thing. And then you take the sculpture out as much as you can, and then you scrape the rest of it out because the sculpture itself is still soft at that point. but that didn't pan out exactly, because when it dries, obviously, you only get back and forth casting. All of the details that happen up inside the face, like the nostrils, are lost because you can only pull the casting out in one direction from the plaster. So anyway, I sculpted the next head and tried to do it with some more detail from the last one, but with the same basic principles facially. Keeping it smooth, relatively wrinkle-free, and trying to get different expressions. And this sculpt was, on the bright side, a lot better than the one before. And this is the final sculpt I'm talking about now. And I cast that in plaster, which went fine. There were some hitches in the process, but as I say, you roll with the punches. So one of them was, I wanted to make a smallish plaster mould so I could not use all of the plaster that I had. So I didn't want to buy any more plaster. So I put the head in a Tupperware. Also, another interesting thing, the way I cast this, usually you need to have wet air drying clay, but I figured I'm not going out spending a day in town, travelling out to get that, when I want a 2-part plaster mould, and the clay is going to cost money and it's not even going to get used and it's going to set me back. So anyway, what you usually do is you set the head in the clay pressing, and you sculpt all of the keys in the clay, which means the bits that form a lock and a seal, just different shapes that form a positive and negative between the two parts of the plaster mould. And then you pour the plaster in on top, let that set, flip the entire thing, take the clay away, then pour the other half of plaster. I thought, nah. What I did was I suspended the head using some silicone, which seems silly, but I didn't use the silicone on the actual thing. I formed like a seal with silicone and then added the head on. I formed like a circular shape for the head to rest on, and then also suspended it with a straw, wedged into the head, touching the bottom of the Tupperware. So this head was suspended about 1.5 inches up from the bottom of the Tupperware. Then I used like an orange juice, I think it was like an orange juice or a milkshake style carton, because I knew it would be waterproof on the inside, watertight. Sealed that with silicone to the bottom of the Tupperware, so I didn't have to use the full. I wanted the depth of the Tupperware I was using, but I didn't want the full shape because that would use up all my plaster. So I glued that in with silicone in sort of an arc shape, a circular, like a semicircle kind of shape. Then I poured all the plaster in. When I came to taking the plaster out, I realised that, that casting went well, by the way. I poured the plaster in and it filled up underneath the back of the head. I think that was a really good idea. I've never seen it done like that before. That is a bit of clever Charlie. Not that it hasn't been done like that before. I'm not the one who came up with it, but I did come up with it by myself. Not even mummy helping. So, okay, so what have we got? So then when it came to taking that out, I realised that the seal that I'd put round in a semicircle was not watertight. And the way I've been looking at it, I didn't notice that all of the plaster had seeped into the other half of the Tupperware as well. So I'd used up way more plaster than I thought and than I wanted to, but not all of it. Just meant I didn't have a lot left over for future casting should I need to. But I did use some plaster at a later point, which saved me. Anyway, that's come to that later, I suppose. Then I flipped that. I took that out, and the trouble is, I didn't have like a full-size plaster cast. I had a plaster cast, the plaster casting I wanted, and then just a big block of plaster behind it in like the shape around what I wanted it to be, because it had been broken up by the bent orange juice carton, but it hadn't formed a watertight seal, if you know what I mean. So I took it out of the Tupperware, took that wedge of plaster out from behind, and then formed the new half of what I wanted to do. So I used silicone on all the sides of the plaster to seal some flexible table mats that we had that we were going to chuck out anyway. Sealed all those to the sides, and then used packing tape and duct tape around the sides and bottom to get a good seal on that, and basically forming like a tube around the plaster casting I already had ready to pour the other half of the plaster in. Now, at this point, the plaster on the top was still soft, so I used a chopstick to poke some keys into it, which was good. Didn't come off. Then I used a release agent, aka fairy liquid, which is supposedly meant to work, and poured in the other half of the plaster. So then the whole thing relatively set well. I'm not sure how good my ratios were with the plaster, and in the future, that's a learning curve. That's a lesson learned. Measure that out more precisely, because I think the plaster was probably too moist. It didn't impair the casting in itself, probably, but it did make the entire process a little bit slower and harder. So measuring jugs for all that stuff, or scales in the future. Then I took away the tube around the outside and put the whole thing in the sun for a bit. It was sunny at that point, so I let it set, and I think a couple of days later I left it very securely, just anxiously hoping that this head would set properly. And it did, it set well. But the trouble, anyway, when I came to take the plaster apart, so I'm having trouble sorting my phone. When I came to take the plaster apart, the plaster wouldn't come apart where I'd done the release agents. I mean, plaster had seeped around the sides. It didn't seep out of the tube. I think that was sealed fairly well. And if it wasn't sealed fairly well, the plaster on the outsides in contact with the air would have set after 10 minutes or so, and I could have refilled it to the top, and it would have formed its own airtight seal, which is one of the nice properties about it in a way. But it's still a bugger getting plaster on your surfaces and shit. Beg your pardon. So I had to cut the two halves of plaster apart anyway, with a knife, and then they sort of wedged apart, which was a scary moment when I pulled them apart, but then it kind of worked really well. They came apart in the centre of the casting. They came apart along the seam line. Then in the rest of it, they came apart in kind of a rocky formation, which I checked straight away. They fit back together really nicely, and they ended up forming a better seal than my crappy chopstick keys would have ever done. So that worked out in my favour. But again, in the future, just do everything properly. Just don't cut corners, and then you won't need to take risks like that. And at a higher level, I should have the resources to do everything properly. So that's a good thing. Next, I took the head out. In retrospect, as I took the head out, that is when all of the problems with the casting happened. In retrospect, what I could have done was, I didn't know what the sculpture was going to be like anyway. I just assumed it would be destroyed, and I had a latex mould of the head before I did the plaster mould, which you can't cast latex in latex, but what you can do is use the latex to create another plaster mould of the same head, and then try the entire casting process over again. Plaster, I'd probably use a silica mould on top of that, but it's not nice to have to bother with that, because every time you cast it, there's more and more imperfections added to the mix over on top of themselves. But I had a backup, and then it turned out that when I pulled it out of the mask, it did mess up the plaster cast a bit, but the head came out more or less perfect, which ended up becoming inconsequential, because the wax paste head sculpt was never used again after this point, luckily. But if I'd have heated the whole thing up, plaster can stand a bit of heat, enough heat that, this wax paste will heat up in your hands. It'll heat up nicely under 75 degrees and become soft enough that it's going to come away nicely from the plaster mould. And that's the main draw of this wax paste stuff, is that it stays soft, which didn't do me a lot of favours in the long run. It was really nice to work with. I was thinking, finally, something that is easy to sculpt with, that doesn't take me hours to produce something good, because I think that second sculpt, the kind of minimalistic one, took me about 15 minutes all in all to get it there, because the wax paste, it was like, felt like a miracle, and then it just consistently disappointed me after that in a lot of ways. Still really good fun to sculpt with, and I'd like to sculpt with it again if I have good plaster casting or fiberglass casting, facilities, because it's nice stuff to work with, especially for quick jobs. It's a lot easier than, say, air drying clay. Just works nicely with your hands, and some of it goes solid, and you can heat other stuff up. So as you add stuff, it doesn't really interfere with the rest of your sculpture. It's got a lot of useful properties for sculpting, not so many for the processes after the sculpt, because the sculpt itself isn't really much good to you because it's all soft. Anyway, so I pulled it out, and the nostrils came off, and part of the face near the eye came off. I glued the part of the face near the eye back. The nostrils, I thought they're gone, as I can probably poke holes in the final casting. I'm not going to let that upset me or spoil things for me. So I mixed up latex. Anyone in prop making would cringe hearing this. But I don't use pigments in latex. I use acrylic paint in small amounts. Mix the colour up perfect, then add latex to that. Never have any problems, except that the quality of the latex afterwards isn't quite as stretchy. It isn't quite as shiny, which I'd have a problem with. But it also isn't quite as long lasting or durable after adding acrylic paint, because you're just diluting the properties of the natural, just natural latex. The real stuff that causes all the nice stretchiness and all the. Anyway, so I added acrylic paint mixed to a skin tone to the thing to cast in the mould, and when I tried to cast the original silicone mould, I tried for probably about on and off for about a month, casting over and over again. I started off because Nick, the guy, was using a different type of like foam latex to me that was that would dry. It would dry properly. My latex, you pour it into the mould, it forms a skin on top and becomes its own Tupperware, and it won't set if you leave it for a year. So then I tried just pouring it into half of it. Again, it all looked like it had set. I took it out, and then the nose was still wet because everything had formed a seal around it. So by the time I came to my final casting, I figured, okay, so you build this up layer by layer. You paint a very thin layer on with the colour. You let that dry out in the sun. It was still sunny at this point. Then you paint on another thin layer, and be aware that if you pour a lot of latex into the thing, what that can do is, by some weird osmosis, which I've learned, I've not learned osmosis, I've learned that this can happen. When you have set latex of the face and then you pour a lot of wet latex into it, by some kind of weird osmosis, the latex that was originally set and dry at the bottom can become moist again if you add too much at a time, and you ruin your casting that way. So you do build it up strenuously, layer by layer, until that is a thick layer set, and then you combine the two halves of the casting, pour a decent bit of latex in, and then tip it up and all around to spread that around the seam. Do that a few more times and you should have a solid head. And I did. First time I cast that one was a success, and that is the first time. I could have cried. It came out proper nice. The casting had imperfections, of course. I used a better release agent this time. I can't remember what I used. It must have been it was something like Vaseline or like some oil thing that I happened to have around the house. But that formed a much nicer release agent, and I painted it on very thin. Previously I've been using talcum powder to make latex dry faster, but obviously that forms into the latex, and just like the acrylic, but to a more extreme degree. Not only does it lighten the latex, it stops its durability and its different useful qualities, which I guess is kind of irrelevant. But I stopped doing that. I do use talcum powder to accelerate drying a lot. I keep a lot of it around. Like stuff like I'm super gluing something together. It's going to get painted over anyway. Talcum powder is helpful to help stuff along, and to smooth out surfaces and take the shine off stuff, all sorts. And also, if I get a bit sweaty, it can go in the pits, and I can go longer without a shower. Anyway, so moving on with this. So the head is cast successfully, but there's some imperfections. The back of the head's kind of bumpy because the plaster mould got a bit crackly, but I figured the back of the head's going to be covered in hair, and the neck I can improve with build-up. And I ended up going a bit mad with the latex build-up, which is basically just painting on very thin layers of latex over and over again. And at one point, the latex build-up looked like it had set. I touched it, and it was half set, and it all crumbled and came away, but it was still stuck to the head. And that's devastating because it's made of the same material as the latex layers underneath, so it is peeling away the original face, and you can't quite find the right balance. And yeah, I felt I ruined the head at one point, and I started casting another one. But then my mum suggested, and by the time I'd cast the other one, by the way, I'd lost all that skin colour from the original head, so I figured, okay, well, I can't use the same latex for the hands, because obviously the acrylic had accelerated the latex drying, which is a bugger, so it just all set in the Tupperware shape, and I had to peel it out and bin it. So then I started casting again, and my mum ended up suggesting makeup, and I was like, no, Mum, that's never going to work, it's ruined. And then I decided I'd give it a go, and I peeled away as much of the latex build-up I could and tried to get it with as few imperfections as I could. And then I added her makeup over the top, and it worked a treat. That makeup stuff's magic. The trouble with that makeup was I later tried to mix it with the latex, and it explained a lot about what had been going on, because it was like oil and water, that makeup and that latex. This is like a foundation makeup, by the way. This is like in a squirty bottle, in like a press down, like a kind of like hand soap, but a lot like a small tube. And I used a bit of that on the face and the hands. So yeah, I had to add makeup to the face, get an even coat, which came out alright, came out nice. Then I had to add a very thin coat of latex. If you added more than a very light dusting of latex, then it'd all just roll off, bead up and roll off. So it took a long, long time to get the face perfected to the point that it was, and it still wasn't fantastic. The hands were slightly easier to get coloured because I could add the makeup straight to the cotton, because it was a cotton latex build-up, and it would soak into the cotton, and then I'd be able to form layers of latex over the top, which would also form to the cotton. So the cotton basically formed like a weird spongy emulsifier type thing. So that was the head. After I'd cast the head, before I started putting makeup on it and ruining the head and then saving the head, and I'm lucky I didn't have to resort to that other casting, by the way, because that went tits up because it was rushed. I painted eyes on the head. The eyes were, again, acrylic and latex, and I literally mixed them up in teaspoons because I needed almost none of them. And I thought the eyes looked great, and I'd gladly make eyes for a puppet like that again. And I think usually puppets like that are eye beads. I had a look in a fabric shop for some eye beads. The ones that they had were rubbish. I figured I'd sooner paint eyes on it. And I did, and I was happy with them. So it was, paint on a layer of white latex, dab on a blob of green latex to keep it spherical, and then a smaller blob of black on top, and ace, nailed it. Thrilled with the eyes, fine. Didn't go wrong at all, which I'm playing up to, because didn't happen a lot in this project, first time successes of anything. So the hands, I took that from an online resource, so it was, by this point I'd managed to acquire some polymer clay, just cheapo online, which I figured this will come in handy for sculpting stuff, being able to bake it into a solid plastic and then paint over. Didn't use that much of it overall in the project, because I ended up just caving and buying some more wet clay the next time I was in town getting resources, and kept stocked up just because, the standard stuff is the best stuff, let's face it. So the hands were, and by the way, this isn't in any kind of chronology, and neither of, the vlogs aren't in a great chronology. I think the vlogs are probably better, that I'm covering an entire subject. They're probably better when I've been covering an entire subject than when I have just done an update, because I think the written logs are good for the chronology, but the vlogs I should be exploring a storyline rather than like a sitcom. I'm playing out 10 storylines over each different episode. I'll just tell you I'll just tell you one story, and then you won't have to follow everything. Because the project, I think my project especially, was big time. It was the juggling act of different things, and it's a hard story to follow if it's not broken up into sections like this. Anyway, tangent ended. I'll go back. So the hands were bent up like jewellery wire, which poses nicely. And then I added polymer clay to form the hands and wrists and baked them into the right shape. And then on top of that, it was cotton build-up. Sorry, I just heard a dog barking in the distance. It was cotton build-up, so that means painting on a thin layer of latex, pulling apart some cotton balls, getting a very thin layer of cotton, dabbing that on top, and then over and over again, and you can twist it around the fingers to form rough finger shapes. I made the hands. I started off making the armatures for the hands a bit too big, because the first test hand I did like that, and I thought, oh no, that looks good, and I put it up against the body, and misguidedly I thought, oh yeah, no, that's fine. I should have consulted at that point the films that I'd watched again, where all of the hands were smaller, well, or just as small in proportion to the bodies as normal hands are. My hands were massive on the puppet in the end, but probably helped to make them bigger considering the precision that it takes to make tiny hands like that. Anyway, so the cotton build-up, the cotton forms, you paint a little bit of latex on the twisted up wire, and the cotton sticks on really nice and forms to it really well and forms like a smooth surface. And the hands looked really good until I started colouring them and painting on latex, and then they got splotchier, and because they were so thick and densely built up, that impeded their function and made them look kind of goofy. But, the hands were fine in the end. I don't need to speak too much about that. The body itself, I had to remake. After that stop motion one, I decided just wasn't up to scratch. And also, I kind of made the head. I made the head bigger than the last sculpt just because I figured I'm tired of doing these tiny, precise sculpts. I'll scale it up, and that'll give me no excuse but to make a new body. It sounds like I'm doing the old pulling a Jesus saying, oh yeah, no, I knew he was going to betray me and I'd be undercrossed the whole time. But that was genuinely a decision I made. I had the other head there as a reference and photos of it and to scale, and the actual head there. But I decided I made it bigger. So I'd sculpted the new head, and I had to make a body to match. And I used a reference from online. I first started with the reference for just drawing people to scale, and I think it's something like 10 heads forms like a full man, maybe. Something like that. And then I tried that. I made a basic armature. I drew it out on paper first, and I thought, no, that looks way too tall. Then I thought, stop motion puppets, of course it's going to be totally different. So I looked into it, and stop motion puppets, there is a principle. It's like, 6 heads or something. And I went roughly by that. I think I went in between, because I wanted him to be relatively realistic. I wanted him to have a slightly bigger head than his body than a real person would, because otherwise, on a puppet, that looks really weird. Same as like the 4-finger principle. 5 fingers on a person looks fine. On a Simpsons character, the cartoonist say it looks like a bunch of bananas, that kind of principle. So I went in between. And then I reckon, with the neck and the feet added, his head came up pretty much to normal lifelike scale, close to at least. It looked like it at least. It looked like it to me. It looked like his head was too small for his body for my liking by the end of it. I mean, if you look at Coraline, her head's massive compared to her body, but then that is a little bit of character. Anyway, interestingly enough, another tangent. I watched a lot of stuff to do with Coraline, and I think Paranorman, a bunch of stop motion films, and it just made me consider things that I hadn't really thought about or had to think about before. Like, there's a whole video on like the lady who made Coraline's jeans and does a lot of the costumes. And not only does this lady knit and weave with normal thread, which which is meant. So she's making, like the pair of gloves in Coraline, a lady had to use more or less sewing thread to knit those with just teeny tiny needles, which is, oh God, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But if you think about it, Coraline's jeans, if they'd have made them out of denim, they'd have come out too wide, they'd have looked really goofy, they'd have looked like bad Action Man clothing, even Action Man clothing scaled down. They had to use just a normal fabric, and then when you go close up, it looks like they look like jeans. But then also that caused a conflict with watching the Man Oh Man, which I did kind of, in my research essay, criticise the Man Oh Man clothing, but really the heavy textures worked for them, and I tried to inject a lot of texture into my film, because it really did, with Man Oh Man, add a lot of depth, where using loose fabrics, like where Coraline wouldn't have had depth, where it would have had closer to like photorealism and scale realism, obviously, which wasn't exactly what they were going for, but what I mean is it was closer to how jeans would look on a real person than we're trying to make this. Coraline, they were trying to make, obviously, a stop motion film, but they weren't trying to say, look at this, it is actually proper small in real life. They just wanted you to be in the story. I definitely, in my film, wanted more of an awareness than that, and inevitably I would have got it, just because my standards probably aren't up to that of, multi-million budget Coraline. Well, at least for now. So, yeah, that was big tangent, took me off topic. So I made the skeleton, so to speak, the rod puppetry skeleton out of tent pegs. There's very little in the way of resources on making rod puppets. Marionettes, there's a good there's good resources on, but those are all based around wood carving. So the sponge and the rod-based thing, I kind of had to come up with myself. I mean, a lot of rod puppets I found online that they made used very similar like they used similar looking things to tent pegs for the actual skeletons of them, and then they would just put like a dress on and let the arms be skinny. None of the rod puppets came out like the films that I'd watched, like the Man Oh Man one. None of the rod puppets, marionette style rod puppets, came out looking like with even remotely human proportions. The ones that there were tutorials on, which was a real shame, so I was sort of flying blind there when I was... But anyway, I found a resource that showed me, just tent peg type, just sticks, just plastic rods, like sticks for the body, cut to size, and then thread or anything flexible to hold them together. So I did that. I made a scale to the scale that this is probably the only time I scaled throughout the building process, like not by eye. And then I ended up going back on that scale. I'll talk about that in a minute, and by in a minute, judging by this, in about 10 minutes. So I glued. No, I'm jumping ahead. So I found tent pegs in my garage. I thought these are the right things. I sawed them to the size that was dictated by my scale drawings, and I marked that all out on paper. Used leathercraft thread and super glue to form the joints, and it was all very flexible ragdoll type thing. And I thought, when I add the body into scale, that will restrict the joints enough. Which didn't in the end, but I found a solution to that regardless. And the fact that, like, the shoulders were on a joint, for example, so the shoulders were connected to in between the torso and the neck, and it let go, the shoulders would just fold flat down against the spine, if you know what I mean. So I knew when the body was in place that the shoulders wouldn't be able to do that. So then it was a case of gluing sponge either side of the of each tent pegs, just gluing sponge oversized, so massive bits of sponge roughly 1.5 inches thick either side. I used all-purpose glue, which comes out quite tacky and flexible, and I don't regret it. Works perfect. All-purpose glue, Asda, cheaper a quid, worth it, rather than using silicone, because it would have taken much longer to set, and it would have been relatively inconsistent, and the seams would have been more of a problem, possibly. Like it wouldn't have been consistently pressed together sponge, because the silicone's thick enough that it could take up space within the seams. So then I used scissors to sculpt it, basically cutting them to size, just cutting little bits away. And my bedroom, no exaggeration, totally full of cut up sponge, which took me back, because I was always sculpting stuff out of sponge for like magic tricks and that, making hammers out of sponge and spraying them different colours, and my mum was always whinging at me about cut up sponge all through the house. And the body came out roughly okay, pretty well, and then I put the head on top of it, and I thought, oh shit, that's no good. That's the one thing I do to scale, and it's come out all wrong. But luckily, the tent pegs, a hacksaw will come clean through them in about 20 seconds, and the sponge is all re-sculptable with the scissors. So basically, I went back to doing it by eye. I cut the arms, the torso, and some of the legs shorter, and it's literally a case of hacksaw the pieces shorter, re-glue the thread, reshape with the scissors, and then he looked good. It was all to scale, and the next day I took another look at it, and I thought, with clothes on, this isn't going to be quite right. And I'll tell you what, it wasn't the next day. It was. I think I did that the next time I went to college, and I saw my granddad that evening. I thought, well, his tummy's nowhere near that big. He's all slimmed out. He's done his exercises, and clothes won't sit on the puppet right either. So I had to firstly tone down his tummy. Then his tummy was too little. Not his tummy was too little. Then I noticed that his chest was too little. So I had to give him like sort of a bit of a chest. And then I thought, okay, well where the crease of the legs basically go straight up to the torso, which isn't exactly what happens on a normal person. So I had to give him a bum for a start, which I used silicone, which actually provided some resistance to stop his legs going too far, and that filled out the trousers a little bit in the right. Well, that I figured would fill out the trousers a little bit in the right direction, and then I had to give him a crotch and all, because your trousers don't tuck right in between where your legs are. They fall below your crotch zone. So I allowed for that, gave him a bit of a crotch, and I didn't want any of this stuff to be noticeable, but I wanted to have it there because it'd help me form the right shapes when tailoring the clothes, and it'd help them fall right. And then he was perfected, but it was still a bit too ragdoll. He still moved about a bit too freely. So I decided that silicone would be good as a default. I know silicone sticks to sponge well, so I added silicone in all the joints so that he'd be very flexible, but also have some resistance, so the puppetry isn't so loose, so that you have to put a little bit more of a push in to get his arm to fully extend, rather than his arm extends far too easily and quickly, considering no one working on the film be a master. Well, I'm not a master puppeteer, so all the help I can get. And also, it would give him a default, because silicone is flexible, but it forms back into its original shape. So if I added silicone to his arms while he was just in a standing, arms down by his sides position, he'd roughly form back into that position as a default, and we wouldn't have to hold his arms in the right place because they'd be sagging too much. And that all worked well. Good decision on that right there. So that wraps that up. So the next thing, shoes. And this was when I started making the shoes while all the sponge was drying. While all the sponge was drying around before I started carving them up, and I saw some lino samples sitting on top of the broken printer on my desk. It was literally one of those books of lino samples. I remember when I was about 13, I wanted to go into lino cutting. I wanted to have a go. And I went into all craft shops, and all lino is proper expensive. My mum's got a friend who did carpeting, so she asked him if he had any lino samples. And they were all about 2 by 2 inches by 3.5 inches. So I made a couple of really small stamps at that point, but the lino was very corky. It wasn't like craft grade linoleum. So it didn't work out, but I still had them there, and I figured those would be good soles for shoes. Those would just be good for carving. Well, with the Stanley knife I got on the table. I remember I was watching, I was carving the puppets, gluing all the sponge to it, and I was watching that show Flowers again. And as I started making the shoes, I was watching the end of it and having a bit of a cry. Not really, apologies. So that's the place I was in emotionally. I looked at the scale of the body. I figured I'm not as tall as my granddad, my arms aren't quite as long, but I do have roughly the same sized feet. He's about a size 11, and I'm about, 11 and a half, 12. Got like a hobbit build on me. So I just put my feet up against my forearm, and then put one of my shoes, my shoed feet up against my forearm, just a tight fitting pair of shoes. I think I've got some size 11s that fit me, like some slip-on Pee-wee Herman loafers. Put that up against my forearm, and I figured, okay, well, proportionally, Grandad's forearm is going to be a bit longer than this, and I measured it up against the puppet itself. This was after, so I did all the arms and legs first, rescaled the puppet at that point, then I was gluing the torso and crying at the end of Flowers, and started making the soles of the shoes. So there is some chronology for you there. So I drew out the shoe soles based on a different pair of shoes that I had in the room that were the same style as I'd envisioned for the character. Just standard brown, smooth toe leather shoes. And cut out the right shape and size out of the lino. Took another shaving of lino and glued it to form the heel, so I could have the shoe curve up to a heel and still have it be flat naturally. Anyway. I'll tell you what it was, because I'd cut the lino samples in half down the side of them widthways, like a very precise thin cut. So they were thick enough to be the sole, but I needed extra sole glued on to form the heel. And then I very precisely shaved off an edge of the lino sample and wrapped that round the heels to cover the seams. And then I painted those I glued them all up into shape, carved, used the Stanley knife to give them all curved edges so they didn't end all harsh. And I modelled them off basically the shoe soles that I had in the room. Well, just a pair of shoes that I had in the room. Then painted them with shoe polish, which is just another thing I had in the room, dark brown shoe polish. And I figured it might take something industrial like this to soak into the cork, and I can make them darker than the brown paint that I intend to use for the shoes. Because the soles, I think, should be darker than the shoes. Shouldn't be the same colour for sure, at least. Shoes. Then downstairs I decided on polymer clay to form a solid shoe, because I don't think I had my wet air drying clay at that point, and I figured polymer clay pushes smooth really easily. more than normal clay does. Polymer clay won't really accept textures of fingers as readily, which is ideal from tests I've done with it and from working with them with the hands. The hands I did before the feet. Well, the hands overlap the feet. The hands I started before the feet and they wound up at roughly the same time. The feet were just they happened in one day in 2 stages, the shoes. I was pretty pleased with them. So I sculpted I rolled up some tin foil to form the bulk of some of the shoe to save using pure polymer clay. All-purpose glue again, tin foil to the sole, polymer clay formed over the top of the shoe and all around, and used some fine tools such as the back of a butter knife and the bent up prong of a fork. I used pliers to bend the prong of a fork because I couldn't find any other skewer type thing to form the lace holes for the shoes. So that's how I did all the fine details. I used tin foil because I figured that will withstand the heat from the oven, and it's just good thing to quickly take up some room, take up some space, kind of like a chicken wire on a smaller scale. So did the sculpt. I used pink and blue colours because I figured I'm painting over these anyway, and the bright pink and the bright blue are the ones I'm least likely to use the polymer clay for in the future to actually have them that colour. Baked them in the oven. They came out ace, painted over them with the standard tin of brown paint that I had from Poundland, big tin. Obviously they weren't shiny at that point, so I used all-purpose varnish on top of those. It was either a skewer or the same prong of I think I'd bent the fork back and I found something to use, like a skewer type thing, and carved out the lace holes again where the varnish had kind of seeped in. Yeah, I patted all the varnish dry with a sponge, and I do think it gave it a slight leathery texture. I tried patting over them with latex to create the leathery texture, but that didn't look nice, and I just peeled the latex off. Again, just a little bit of trial and error. Then I used the same Leathercraft thread, which was like a nice lighter brown, to form the laces, and super glued them in place just in small amounts. Just super glued lengths of Leathercraft thread into one side, just all of them into one side of the laces, and then crossed them over and glued them into the other sides, and then formed like a little bow and super glued it all in place, and they held to the end of the project. So they weren't embedded in any way. I didn't poke them into the original sculpture, but did the job fine. And the laces did become darker due to the super glue anyway, so they kind of blended in with the shoe, and there was such a small detail. The actual laces were covered up by the trousers by the end of it, so I don't think they'll show up in the film. Anyway, so that's the shoes dealt with. I'm going to consult the problem solving again. So there's the whole sculpting process I'm scrolling past. Okay, so that's pretty much the body. So talk about the overalls themselves. I don't think I mentioned it in the actual problem solving, because I figured hard copy I'll make myself sound a bit more impressive. My mum helped me. She's not a better sewer than me, but I'm better at sewing, and she's had more experience with patterns and clothes making and tailoring, but my actual needlework skills are top notch. So she helped. I found the pattern. She helped me transcribe it to paper and wrap it around, and she helped show me how to pin it to size nice and evenly. And then it was a case of sewing it, turning it inside out, and the zip was actually not just cool looking, it was functional. those overalls come off. Well, they did come off before I glued the shoes on underneath them. But that meant that we could unzip the overalls, put them on inside out, and have a lot of the seams on the inside. And then a lot of sewing stuff had to happen after anyway. But I didn't mind the seams showing, because it's just all part of the journey. It's part of the charm of it. You know, the imperfections add depth to the costume itself. The audience can maybe spot it and see that it's something that's crafted. It's very clearly not something that's bought. I didn't pinch it off an Action Man or something. Anyway, so that's the costume. Not really much to go into. It's a fairly boring and standard process, cut out of a pair of shorts. I bought them specifically for the job. I was wondering for a long time what colour to have his overalls. Didn't want them to be brown because that's ugly. Didn't want them to be green to match the room. I didn't want them to be too light. Yeah, so I opted for a cream, basically. Just beige, just the most nothing colour that you can choose. Just the white noise of colours, the Coldplay or the James Blunt of colours. Just the colour for people who don't care about colours. But no, I think it worked. And I figured, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll add some stains and some imperfections to it. But those actually came naturally from trying to attach. So I put the overalls on, then I siliconed in, then I added the head with silicone so that it could bend. I added the hands with super glue because the wrists could stay in place. And then I added the shoes with super glue and all, just to the bottom. So he ended up with a lot of stains on him anyway, just from all the crap that was happening around him on the overalls. So I figured, that's perfect, that's great. That's almost really meta, those stains around his head, hands and feet. That's like, did the puppet create them himself? Or was it a product of the creator's, human flaws? Not that anyone in the world would pick up on that. I barely pick up on it. It's just talking for how long now? An hour and 12 about my own project. I guess I shouldn't be a person who gets to talk about myself for over an hour, because I get this. It's a bit like, I don't know, masturbatory now. So the clothes, and now the scene I'll talk about. I've got a really dry throat, so I think I'm going to walk back home, get a drink, which means I'll have to cut off the recording past all the roadworks and stuff. So 4 bits of A1 foam board, 10 quid for 4 at the range. I ended up using 3. I didn't want to have it sitcom style. Initially, I wanted to have 4 walls, but I figured I can definitely shoot this uncompromisingly with 3. Basically, as I got to the storyboarding stage, I thought, I don't like it in films when they shoot from the left of a person and then the right of a person. And I think every film, whether or not it's cool, should have plenty of establishing shots. It's going to sound rude now, but I see a lot of the films made by the peers, a lot of the films on the 48-hour film project, I found slightly hard to watch, just because people seem to be afraid of wide shots, because of course close up, shallow depth of field shots look amazing, they're gorgeous and everything, but I don't know where I am, you know. But I figured I can do that with just 3 walls, and I find it more alienating when you keep shooting from one side of a person than the other side of them. Stay relatively consistent. It's kind of like in films. I like it when when the characters travel from left to right all the time, and if they're going in one direction, you don't see them going from left to right of the screen and then right to left of the screen, unless they are in fact going back on themselves, that sort of thing. And I think the sitcom style helps that, and the fact that I can detach the walls means I've got plenty of freedom for close-ups and alternative angles. And should I need to turn back on him for whatever reason, I can very, very easily mock up a fourth wall out of the canvas material and a frame, paint it green, stick it out of focus because it won't have as much attention paid to it, and then have a mid shot of him against the fourth wall if the need arises, but I don't think it will. So the process for the canvases themselves involved stretching the canvas fabric over the canvases. Took way longer than I thought they would. Everything did. Everything became, I will just stretch some canvas fabric over these solid bits of foam board, and I'll glue them, and then I'll paint them. And then it became, I'll stretch these bits of canvas fabric over the foam board, find out that the tension is too much and the foam board is bending up and near snapping, so I will press them against the floor, make a wooden frame with a bit on each four edges and then two supporting pieces along the middle, use a load of glue because I don't want to be using nails and tacks to compromise the foam board, and I'll hold them down with heavy books and furniture and leave them in my room for days at a time. It ended up taking ages. Then the painting went wrong because I mixed up a colour, but I didn't mix up enough of it, and this happened over and over again, and they soaked up so much paint in the end, so I just ended up having to buy loads of children's finger paints to form the white. So the aim was to make a green tinted beige. I didn't want it to be too green. I bought a big acrylic tube of green paint, like a proper big one. I don't know how many mil, but it was a generously sized one, and that probably would have painted all the walls in itself if painted delicately, which I didn't paint delicately. I painted slapdash, just trying to cover it and get it roughly even. But in the end, I bought two massive children's white finger paints because the whites don't seem to have much influence. As soon as you add a little bit of colour, it's pretty dark. So it was the final mix was a combination of brown, white, and green, and I used more brown than you'd expect looking at the colour to make it more of an off. The white made it a faded green, and the brown made it an off green, and it wasn't the green tinted beige I was going for, but I wanted to go for, I was afraid of doing something too bold, and I wanted the green tinted beige to make it really nice and subtle, like I'd seen in a bedroom scene in Scott Pilgrim where they're all sitting on a bed talking to each other, and I thought, that's the colour, that's it there. I couldn't find screenshots of it, and I wasn't going to go through getting the film to watch it all through again. But I got away with something bolder. I think in the original concept drawing I wanted the room to be green, basically because I didn't want the room to be brown. Because I can't think of anything that would look more boring without depth and depressing, as much as I'm drawn to browns. So I'm happy with the colour. Overall, when I stretched the canvas over the frames as well, I used a bit of foam board that I'd cut out to spread some PVA style wood glue over to make sure that the canvas fabric would stick to the frame and there wouldn't be too many bubbles. Some of them came out really nice, some of them came out quite bubbly and imperfect, so I couldn't stretch them out with enough tension. I ironed all of the canvas fabric first, but then I couldn't really stretch them out with enough tension to get them straight and also not snap the foam board. But all's well that ends well, they look fine, and there won't be any plain walls at this point in designing. They'll all be having stuff in front of them or attached to them. And I've got plenty of supporting wood to drill through to if I need to, which is, I suppose, possibly a silver lining. My throat's really hurting. Excuse me. So the table's next. So the tables were sort of talk about the whole process of picking up all those bits of veneer when I get back, because my throat's hurting from talking for this long and being thirsty. Okay, so this is part one of the building process vlog. Okay, so back home, throat is better, had a drink. I believe I was up to talking about the tables that I built. But first, I suppose I've got to talk about the which, you know, I was looking forward to bragging about. I'm kind of past it now. The massive haul of stuff that I got from that old building site. So basically, the deal is about approximately 2 miles. I mean, I think the walk is 2 miles, but I think the actual distance is less, because you're taking a bit out of your way. There's an abandoned building site. They started building something big, and they shut it down, so there's all wheelbarrows, massive wrapped up things of bricks, all chicken wire, and loads of doors and old furniture. And just basically, I've harvested it for ages. And recently people have started fly tipping again, so as much as I don't like littering, I don't mind them replenishing my free stock. I'm not complaining here in that respect. I shot the Plastic Man music video, the end scene, up near there. Very close, in fact. And anyway, so I went one time at about 8 o'clock in the evening, and I saw the amount of stuff that was there. And I thought, well, okay, I'll go home, I'll get ready and I'll get equipped, and I'll come back in a bit. And I left the house at maybe 9, I think it was nearly 2 hours all in all. So my sister's shouting downstairs, I hope you can't hear it. Anyway, so I left at about 9:30. I brought some plastic bags, which I didn't end up using, like an elastic bike strap, and I was wearing a belt. But I figured that stuff would be enough. And then the amount of wood that I picked up that I wanted to take was far too much for me to carry, and I figured, alright, I can try and do it in one trip, and then I'll drop some along the way, and I'll probably have to come back for that. And what I did was, I wrapped up the wood in the middle with the elastic bike strap, and obviously it all splayed out at the edges, so I figured, okay, I'll need something else, so I took off my belt, wrapped it at 2 different ends, then tried lifting it up. That weighed so much that I ended up taking part of the elastic bike strap and part of my belt on either side, and clamping onto them with my jaw, which took a lot of the weight off my arms. And at one point I think I lifted my arms away underneath, and I was pretty much lifting it like that. So, and then, you know, I switched the weight between. And then I'd found loads of veneer wood. Part of that was wrapped up with the wood, and a good enough deal of it was stuffed down the back of my trousers. I figured, I've got some room there since the belt's gone. I can't carry it by hand. What I didn't figure was, I'm wearing quite small pants, and this is going to scratch my arse and thighs big time. And it did. But I got it all to the roadside, and I figured, right, there was more stuff I wanted back up there, and I'm not going to get the rest of this home like this. I'm not going to be able to carry it sideways on the side of the road. I'm taking up so much room. So I walked home for my wheelbarrow, which I acquired from the same building site, actually. You know, you've got to have a wheelbarrow. It's like having a suit. You're moving up in the world. Wheeled it up to the back, walked back home. By this time it was about, I don't know, 10 o'clock, maybe later. Wheeled that back to the roadside, left the wheelbarrow and all of the wood at the roadside. Walked back through. It's like a gate into like a footpath. Walked back up to the building site. Got another like arms full of stuff, not quite as heavy. Walked it back down this massive hill, out to the roadside. Loaded it all up into the wheelbarrow. It overhung the wheelbarrow massively. I didn't have anything to fasten it in place with the wheelbarrow, so I kind of had to hold the wheelbarrow and then stand, but sort of crouch, but keep my arms straight to try and keep it as low as possible. Which, after about 30 seconds of walking like that, killed my back. And as soon as I was walking it back incredibly slowly, with cars occasionally coming past, but most of them were blocked by the roadworks, which was quite lucky. Because I'm not. And I'll tell you what, I won't say that on the vlog. I won't say anything about the legality of what I was up to. I think no, because it was all public property and it's all fly tipping. No, all I can say is for a fact, no one's going to miss that stuff. And it was dumped there in an inappropriate way, and I've probably done the world a small favour in a way, because now some of that crap's in my front garden instead of along a public walkway. The whole place is a massive tetanus risk. So when I'm walking around, I mean, I've pulled nails out of my shoes walking around there. Anyway, so I went back for another trip, walked it back to the wheelbarrow, loaded it all up. I'm walking back past houses, and then the wheelbarrow wheel begins to squeak, obviously. And I got it back. I got it back. All in all, I think it took till about 11:30. It was I listened to 2 podcasts, like long ones, while I was out there. It felt like ages, and I was absolutely shattered. But I figured I want to document this, so I got a photograph of the wheelbarrow. I thought, that looks kind of small on the photograph, so I got a video to try and indicate scale. And I went to bed just absolutely shattered. But I had loads of veneer wood, which is what I'd been after really the whole time, and what I've been after for loads of projects in the future. I was trying to make a pair of sunglasses in the past, and I was trying to make wooden rings, and veneer wood's good for that, but veneer wood costs a fortune. This stuff was all free. And the main difference is I just had to brush a lot of dirt off of this veneer wood, which didn't take much doing. So, and also this veneer wood didn't come flat. It was kind of imperfect and ridgy. But I think that lent itself to the overall final aesthetic, and it was correctable to a certain degree. But I would argue it added charm to the furniture. I'm thrilled with how the furniture turned out. It was basically, the furniture was made out of cardboard, just a basic rectangular shape. Then both of them, it was a case of a big piece of veneer I cut with Stanley knives, and occasionally I'd score them with Stanley knives over and over again. It wasn't getting the job done because I was working against the grain, so I'd finish it off with scissors and hope that all of the wood split on the other side of the scissors to where I was cutting. But I built up a technique for that after a while. 2 big panels on the sides and top, and then I basically, again, I referenced the designs briefly, but it was just freehand, cutting out drawers and the panels in between. I just figured I was already pretty scared for the project at this point, and I figured I don't have time for functional drawers, so just glued all the drawers onto the front. Painted underneath the drawers a darker brown onto the cardboard to give it a bit of depth. Not that really shows up. First table I stained with brown acrylic mixed with white water. What the fuck? Sorry. Brown acrylic mixed with water. Diluted brown acrylic mixed with white water. Brown acrylic mixed, diluted brown acrylic paint. Very diluted, so just stained all the wood a darker shade of brown, and then all-purpose varnish over the top of that gave it a nice sheen. Made the handles out of clay and the wood just because I had it to hand quickly. Sprayed them all gold, glued them to the front. Lovely quick. Well, I say quick job. The darker of the two probably took me a full day. I was up till late finishing that off. I was very pleased with it. The other one was quicker, but I think that was probably just because of the practice I'd had up until then. Inspired from sort of a Welsh-style dresser I've got in my house. And it was all light veneer. Some of it was more faded, and some of than the other. So and also it was just too light for the scene, really, and the colour scheme. So I stained it with very diluted brown acrylic, which I mixed with a mustardy colour to make sure it'd be distanced enough from the other desk. I didn't want them to look like they were the same. Same exact colour, same exact type of wood, either of them. But the grain show up on both, which I owe to staining and varnishing rather than painting. painting would have been a really silly idea. You wouldn't have got any of that realistic wood grain. And also, I think the nice thing about that wood grain is it's not a massive indication of scale, because wood grain can exist in really dense and really like sparse and wide forms, such that the desks are obviously miniature, but it's not as though the desks are a giveaway of the exact scale, just because there's a lot of possibility there in terms. Well, I'm not explaining myself well. Okay, so the desks, I suppose. Okay, so I had and then next was, I think before I'd built the floor, I used some of the vinyl flooring that I bought to do skirting all around the canvases. Yeah, that was before I built the floor. So I cut the vinyl flooring and just cut strips from it. It was oh, my granddad said there was a word for the type of floor, and it began with a P. I'll be looking it up and still trying to talk at the same time. It was like a crisscross grid wooden flooring pattern. Being very subtle here. Anyway, so it was a certain crisscross design. So I cut out the smaller strips of the wood, and use that for the skirting all the way around. It is stick-on vinyl flooring stuff, cut easily with a sturdy pair of scissors. Stanley knives were better for more, more precision. And they did stick on by themselves, but super glue helped keep them on, because I think some of them were falling off, and most of them would most likely have fallen off during the filming, considering what went wrong with the set. So I think that took me up. No, that didn't. Then with the wood I had from the hall. You might call it a hall. I built the floor the floor was pretty basic. I laid the wood out in formation, and then had supporting bits. So I lay out the wood. I started off with a frame, which was a square the length of each canvas, which just sawed by eye. Then again, just roughly measured out, marked with a pencil, loads of panels to go in between, and then in the other direction I had three blocks of wood total, which raised the floor up another inch, the width of the wood, from the floor. And so I had a flat floor, then a base that was holding all of the wood together, that was nailed in, and copious amounts of wood glue to keep it all secure. Then I glued. I picked up some gin mats from Poundland, not specifically for this project, but because I've been looking for the Poundland gin mats for ages. Just because that EVA, or that, even craft foamy type material costs a lot in any other format than Pound Shop. So yeah, I just wanted some. And then I decided that this wood is all this wooden floor could do with being smoother, and I figured if I glued and pressed craft foam into it, it would take up some of the imperfections and form a better base to stick the flooring onto. So I did. I think I used a combination of silicone and the PVA style wood glue, and again flipped the whole thing. The gym mat foam pressing into the floor, and a good bit of weight on top to keep it nice and flat. And then I stuck the rest of the tiles on top. So then I had the whole room furnished, and nothing much else. So it was the room had a door frame, it's all skirted. I don't think I'd done the door yet, actually. And then two desks. And I think this was
before I came into college, found out how close the deadline was, and crap my pants, went straight back home and started building. That was a Tuesday. I built Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday I was filming, and I'll be honest, I don't quite know how I had the rest of the scene done in that short an amount of time, considering how much trial and error was involved in the rest of it. But I'll do my best to go over it. So, the biggest thing for me was all of the tiny things, which I initially wanted to wood carve, and I'd done tests with wood carving. And I had another look at some of the wood I picked up, and none of it was suitable. It was all loose grain, like fencing panels, and I'd picked up some like almost wooden dowels in kind of an oval shape that looked like a good wood, but that was almost too tight a grain to carve with the materials with the carving. I've got cheap Stanley knives, and I've got I still have my lino cutting tools from when I was 13, which were technically cheap wood cutting tools from China or something, which weren't tough enough to pet. So anyway, clay was the way to go. I had picked some up from. We went to the Mermaid pub out for lunch with my nan one time, and I popped to the range to check for supplies that I might need, knowing that I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to spend half a day in town at this stage in the project again. So I had air drying natural clay. So I sculpted loads of tins, which I did by, sculpting a cylinder shape, using the back of a butter knife to run lines around the bottom and top, and then I used a battery to impress the tin can kind of shape in the top. I just looked around for something appropriate, and the batteries were perfect. The bottles similar. I just shaped a bottle. I did a bottle shape back of a butter knife for the lid. And there was some more specific things like the jug and the cups of paintbrushes and stuff. But it was all just hand sculpted, not too difficult. No special tools. But then anyone can find decent sculpting tools around the house, especially when you live with ladies who've got all sorts of spot popping kits, and if you just have a relatively well stocked for crap tools kitchen. The heads and the heads were a slightly different story. So, but again, that was just sitting down in an evening with some clay and sculpting small heads just with different characters. Because I thought it'd be nice to include them in the film, whether or not I cut to a close up. So I sculpted the heads and painted them with a wood effect with the help of Mum, which was just basically just different textured things like sponges and scouring pads, layering it up from darker to lighter colours. But basically, yeah, we just painted fast. There was a hand and a foot also, just because those were basic sculpting exercises that I'd done before, but clearly forgotten some of the fundamentals because they came out a little bit goofy. The tools, again, just went and sculpted them and painted all the wooden stuff at the same time. So we had all different depths of brown, and I wanted the tools to look like. I wrote in my design research, that I wanted the tools to look like they'd been acquired over certain years. And to be honest, I didn't end up deciding to have loads and loads of cluttered tools filling the whole place up. Just because I thought it would be a bit overbearing and it wouldn't be worth it. In the final film, I think you can achieve clutter subtly, without overloading a scene. Which was just a couple of upturned paint pots and some mess on the table, just scattered about, relatively disorganised. And again, the backboard to that was veneer, which I stained just like a redder type of wood. Mum went to a meeting up in. Oh blimey! I can't remember now. They had a market. She rang me up and she said, "Do I need any paints?" And I said I could do some spray on primer and maybe some metallic paints. And I got some spray on metallic paints and a tin of primer, which the the tin of prime was so thick that it was no good for the smaller sculptures, so I just painted straight onto them. But the metallic spray paints were good. I'd have been happy with normal metallic paints, but the spray paints did speed it up at that point. They did speed up the process, even if I had to spray paint directly onto items that I was holding in my hands, and I had gold fingernails for a few days. Being honest, I guess this is technically relevant. From Tuesday to Friday, I didn't get much sleep. I didn't wash. Every day I woke up and my mum told me how terrible I looked, and I felt as terrible. But I got it done, and after I didn't wash through, I didn't have wash or sleep through filming. Sunday night, the night before going back to college, I had like brown paint all in my hair, and I was greasy and disgusting, and I had to bathe like twice, because just the water came out just a disgusting grey brown. Oh, Jesus Christ, sorry. Whoever's having to listen to this, sorry. But yeah, it was intense. I worked hard, but maybe that was a result of neglect beforehand, but I do feel like the project and the building is a product of a lot of work, undeniably. Whether or not that's proportionate to 13 weeks, I think it was far too ambitious, and we'll just have to see if the written work's taken too much of a hit for it. But anyway, back to this. The hanging thing that features on his desk was lifted directly from one the photo of the desk that is in my design research, the really cluttered one that I thought was kind of cool, like a female form. That one had arms and legs, but afterwards I saw another one in another workshop in a photo that I believe is featured in my research without arms and legs, and I kind of think there's that creepy point in Hangman where it's just a head and a body. So it's kind of like you're hanging an amputee. But I figured that that could be a tool for tailoring to a female form. The costumes that are mounted in the background. So I made the one with the suit and the pretty little, I don't know, princessy girly dress thing. The other three my sister made. I said to her. She said to me, "Oh no, you got to give me some idea." And I said, do a clown." And she just did a clownish costume. And then I said, she goes, "Oh, can I? Okay, I'll do another one. What do you want me to do?" And I said, do whatever you want." She did another clown, and then I said, "Okay, how about a cool leather jacket then?" And she did a cool leather jacket, and Lucy painted I think I painted the dress pink and the jacket black, and she did all of the fine details, and she painted all of her own as well. Very grateful. She will be featured in the credits. Mum helped to paint a lot of the paint pots and the bottles, and she'd have me. I was on the other side of the room sculpting other stuff, and she'd have me spray the silver metallic paint into the lid because she didn't want to get it near her. She didn't want to inhale it, but I was happy to. More than happy to. You're welcome, Mum. The shelves, strips of veneer, varnished, nails hammered straight through the foam board, not into wood, and a piece of leather epoxy glued to the veneer and hammered up into the wall. And they were fine. They collapsed a few times, but as did the entire set during filming. Light switch again. Clay. It's 100% clay and a small bit of spaghetti for the like sort of dowly bit. Same with the hook. The leather apron is directly cut from a sheet of leather with scissors, and then super glued a pocket onto the top, and the pocket is literally the bit of fabric that I cut out to make the neck bit. Yeah, it's nothing too complicated. It's not really about the precision and skill that went into each individual piece. I guess it's more about the volume. The door was the same bit of foam board that I cut out of the foam board piece, the wall panel with the door frame in it, and I just glued the just some of the leftover vinyl floor into that in a nice door-like formation, handle, clay, spray painted gold. And to evaluate myself, I would, I'd say the build was really good. The volume of work was inconsistent. It was slow. It definitely snowballed, but I think snowballed is an under exaggeration. It was more like just quietly moving stasis, and then a massive panic to get it done at the end. I was making slow progress, and then I built half the scene in 4 days, or just all of more or less most of the scene elements in 4 days. So yes, looking back, it could have done with better time management and planning, and the fact that I was surprised by the deadline is frankly embarrassing. And I don't get marks for having poor time management, but I hope that whoever's grading this will know that I'll take the lesson forward into the future, because this has put the fear of God up me, and the stress has been intense. I can see it in my skin. It's really terrible. Stress is an incredible thing, what it does to you and how it manifests itself so physically. And I won't put myself through this again. The organisation in the future, because I know there'll be prop making projects more intense than this, with tighter time frames than this, time scales than this, because this isn't a prop making project. This was a filmmaking project that I forced myself into doing prop making for. Last thing I haven't talked about is the head, which I think I might have talked about. Anyway, so the head that is featured, that picks up and sands and puts on the shelf, is the original silica mould that I cast out of plaster. No more nails filling out the gaps in the moulding, and then sanded it and painted it like wood. Anyway, back to evaluate myself. Sorry, I was just getting a bit... Maybe I was getting a bit uncomfortable talking about it. But I would say, whether or not the time management was there, I built it within... I did the building within the confines of my deadline. And I would say what I've managed to do is a big achievement. I think I said that on my last project, though. But to be fair, I had the puppets done by the time I was coming in for the final major last year. I was ready with the puppets. But the thing about last year's project is it didn't come off anything like what I wanted it to. I had the puppets there. I had the script. I shot a quarter of what I wanted to do, and I edited it into a trailer. What I did achieve was I'd made some cool puppets, and I achieved a relatively unique aesthetic with the film. The oil painting like background, and it definitely had a style of its own, which I guess you don't see every day, and that is one thing I can take away. I don't know whether the style of its own. I don't know whether this has a style of its own. I would definitely say there's a lot of me in it. But I would say it is in of itself a big achievement, and if I am able to capture what I've achieved in this room, in the film, in the final edit, then that will be something I can take away with me. And hopefully, should everything go terribly wrong, this would be something that universities would be able to look at and consider. And this is my biggest achievement in prop making to date. And I suppose I'm too scared to be proud right now. But I'm sure I'll look back and think, I didn't know. If everything goes right, I'll go to and study prop making at university and become really good at all the things, and I'll look back and go, I didn't know anything, and I managed that. Good for me. That's the dream. But also, of course, I'd like to look back on it from a filmmaking standpoint and think, well played, sir. But time will tell. As for the project on the whole, that's not a subject for this vlog, and I've probably put whoever's listening to this through enough. So thank you. That's part 2 of the prop making coverall vlog, just retelling the entire story. Okay.